The galaxy was a vast and dangerous place, filled with many strange and powerful species. Among them was the Cybernetians, a race of beings who had long ago combined their flesh with machines. Their strength came from their cybernetic enhancements, which made them almost invincible. At the top of their society stood Princess Zuria, the most advanced of them all. Her cybernetic implants were so powerful that many considered her the perfect being. But the princess's life was not as perfect as it seemed. Despite her great power, she had enemies. Enemies within her own people. Zuria had once been the proud heir to the throne, but her reign was short-lived. A coup, led by the very leaders who had once supported her, had left her betrayed and broken. Zuria was cast out, abandoned on a desolate planet far from the center of Cybernation civilization. The planet was barren, a place where nothing lived but the rusted ruins of machines long forgotten. It was here that Zuria was left to die. Her cybernetic enhancements had been damaged during the coup, and without the proper care, her systems were slowly failing. Her once sharp mind, enhanced by the most advanced technology, was beginning to slip. Yet, even in her weakened state, Zuria could feel the sting of betrayal deep within her heart. She had been a princess, a symbol of her people's strength. Now she was nothing more than a discarded tool. Her people had cast her aside, thinking her too weak to be of use. They saw her not as a leader, but as a problem that needed to be removed. And yet, even as her body began to deteriorate, Zuria's resolve remained strong. She would survive. She had to. But survival alone wasn't enough. Zuria wanted something more. She wanted revenge. She wanted to take back her throne, to make those who had betrayed her pay for what they had done. But that would require help. Help that seemed impossible to find. She was alone, trapped on a dying planet, with no hope of escape. Meanwhile, far from the Cybernation world, aboard a small human warship, a soldier named Ethan was preparing for his next mission. Ethan wasn't important in the grand scheme of things. He was just another soldier, a faceless member of humanity's vast military. The human fleet had been at war with the Cybernetians for years, and Ethan had seen his fair share of battles. But unlike many of his comrades, Ethan wasn't driven by hate or revenge. He fought because it was his duty. It was during a routine mission in a distant system that Ethan's path would cross with Zuria's. The fleet had intercepted strange transmissions from the Cybernetians, including distress signals and coded messages. It was in these communications that Ethan first heard of Princess Zuria. At first, he didn't think much of it. After all, the Cybernetians were enemies, and their internal struggles were none of his concern. But there was something about the way the transmissions described her, something that tugged at his heart. He heard the desperation in her voice, the plea for help. And that was when he learned the truth. Zuria had been abandoned by her own people, left to die on a forgotten world. For days, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about what he had heard. The Cybernetians were ruthless, and the betrayal of their own princess seemed like something out of a twisted story, but it was real. And it was happening right now. Ethan couldn't ignore it. He couldn't just turn away and pretend he hadn't heard the princess's call for help. In his heart, he knew that he had to do something. He wasn't a high-ranking officer, and he didn't have the power to change the course of the war. But he was a soldier, and soldiers fought for something greater than themselves. For days, he wrestled with his decision. The human military was already engaged in a bitter conflict with the Cybernetians. Declaring war on them over the life of a single princess seemed insane, but Ethan couldn't help it. He felt as though it was his responsibility. She had been betrayed by her own kind, and now she was alone. Alone, but not forgotten. Finally, Ethan made up his mind. He would go to Zuria's rescue. It wasn't about the war. It wasn't about politics or power. It was about a life that had been discarded, a princess who had been left to die on a dying world. Ethan knew the risks. He knew that his decision would put him at odds with both the Cybernetians and his own people, but he didn't care. With determination in his heart, Ethan began to plan. He wasn't going to fight a war. He wasn't going to attack the Cybernetians out of hatred. He was going to fight for Zarya because she deserved a chance at life. And, perhaps in the process, he could show the galaxy that humanity was capable of something more than just war and destruction. As Ethan prepared to make his move, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of person Zarya was. What would he find when he reached her? A broken princess, a powerful queen determined to reclaim her throne, or perhaps someone who had lost all hope, just like the planet she was stranded on. He didn't know, but he was about to find out. Ethan sat in the small command room of his ship, staring at the star map in front of him. His fingers hovered over the controls, but he couldn't bring himself to make the next move. The mission was clear, but the consequences were anything but. To most, what he was considering seemed impossible. It wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a declaration of war. The Cybernetians were formidable. Their technology was advanced, their army was vast, and their reach extended across the stars. Humanity, though resilient, was still fighting an uphill battle against them. But this was different. This wasn't about the war. This wasn't about victory or defeat. This was about a life. A single life that had been abandoned, left to die on a dying world. Ethan thought about the princess, Zarya. The message he had heard about her plight had haunted him for days. He could still hear her voice echoing in his mind. Desperate, alone, betrayed by the very people she had once ruled over. The image of her on that desolate planet, surrounded by the ruins of her own world, stayed with him. It weighed on his conscience. He was just a soldier, a small cog in the machine, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had to do something. He couldn't just sit back and let her die. Ethan wasn't alone in his decision. He had shared the details of the mission with a few trusted officers, and while most had been skeptical, a few had stood by him. They understood the stakes, even if they didn't agree with his reasoning. For them, it was clear. Declaring war on the Cybernetians for a single princess seemed reckless. But for Ethan, it wasn't just about the princess. It was about what she represented. It was about humanity's sense of honor. Humanity's willingness to fight for what was right, even when the odds were against them. The human fleet was already stretched thin. The war had drained their resources, and every battle seemed to be harder than the last. But Ethan wasn't going to back down. He had made his decision, and now he had to follow through. The first step was to gather support, not just from his fellow soldiers, but from the higher-ups in the military. He needed to make them understand. But how could he convince them to support this? How could he explain that saving a single life, one that didn't even belong to his species, was worth the risk of a full-scale war? Ethan stood up and walked over to the communication console. He had sent out a message to his superiors, detailing his plan. It wasn't just a simple request for permission. It was a call to action. He wasn't asking for help. He was telling them what he was going to do. As he watched the screen, waiting for a response, Ethan's mind raced. He thought about the princess once more. She was alone, trapped on a planet, with no one to turn to. Her own people had betrayed her. The ones who were supposed to protect her had cast her aside like a broken tool. Ethan couldn't let that stand. The message came through, and he braced himself for the response. To his surprise, it wasn't as harsh as he expected. The commanding officer's voice came through, calm but firm. Ethan, we understand your concerns, but this is bigger than one person. The Cybernetians will retaliate. Our fleet is already at risk. We don't have the luxury of diverting resources for a rescue mission, especially one that could escalate the situation. Ethan's heart sank. He knew it was coming. They wouldn't understand, but he wasn't ready to give up just yet. I know the risks, Ethan replied, his voice steady. But if we don't act now, she'll die, and will be no better than the Cybernetians who abandoned her. There was a long pause on the other end, the silence stretching for what felt like an eternity. Finally, the commanding officer spoke again. All right, Ethan, we'll give you the resources you need, but this is on you. If this goes south, it's your responsibility. Understand? Ethan nodded, his heart pounding. It wasn't the answer he had hoped for, but it was enough. He had the support he needed. The rest was up to him. With the decision made, Ethan quickly moved to prepare his ship and the fleet. He gathered the officers who had pledged their support, and together they began their preparations. The mission was clear: get to Zuria, rescue her, and bring her back to safety. But he knew that the Cybernetians wouldn't just let them leave. There would be a fight, a big one, and Ethan was ready for it. As the human fleet began its journey toward the desolate planet, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what he would find when they arrived. Would Zuria be alive? Would she be willing to accept their help, or would she reject them as she had rejected everyone else? He didn't know, but he was going to find out. The stars above seemed endless, like an ocean of lights scattered across the universe. The human fleet moved swiftly through the void, each ship carrying its own story, its own purpose. But for Ethan, the mission he was on had become something more than just a military operation. It was a test of everything he believed in, a test of humanity's ability to stand for what was right, even when the cost was high. As the fleet made its way toward the desolate planet where Princess Zuria was stranded, Ethan's thoughts were filled with uncertainty. The plan was risky, and they were still vastly outnumbered. The Cybernetians had a powerful military, and they wouldn't just let a small human fleet invade their space without retaliating. But Ethan couldn't let fear stop him now. He had made his decision, and there was no turning back. He had gathered a handful of the most experienced officers from his ship. They had pledged their support, agreeing that the princess's rescue was worth the risk. The fleet's commander, Captain Briggs, was one of the few who had stood by him. The rest of the crew, though uncertain, trusted Ethan. He had earned their respect over the years, and now they were willing to follow him into the unknown. Ethan, Captain Briggs said as he walked into the ship's command center. "We're almost there. The fleet is ready, but we need to talk strategy. Once we reach the planet, the Cybernetians will know we're here. We'll be fighting for our lives." Ethan nodded. "I know, but we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for her. For Zuria." Briggs sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I still don't fully understand why this is worth the risk, but I trust you. Let's make sure we have a plan for when we get there." The fleet's approach to the planet was quiet, almost eerie. The once thriving world was now a barren wasteland, filled with crumbling ruins and shattered machines. The planet's atmosphere was thick with dust, and the air felt heavy, as though it had been waiting for something, for someone, to return. Ethan's ship was the first to break through the planet's atmosphere, the other ships following closely behind. They landed in a secure area far from the main Cybernetian strongholds, hoping to avoid detection for as long as possible. The crew immediately went to work, setting up a perimeter and preparing for any potential attacks. Ethan felt a sense of urgency in his chest as he looked at the empty landscape outside the ship's window. He didn't know what awaited them on the surface. Would Zuria be alive? Would she be willing to trust them? He couldn't afford to wait any longer. The time to act was now. He grabbed his communication device and sent a message to Captain Briggs. "We're ready. Let's move out. We'll find her." The plan was simple. The team would divide into smaller groups to search the area for any signs of life. Ethan and a few of his most trusted soldiers would head to the coordinates where the distress signals had originated. They would find Zuria and bring her back to safety. As Ethan prepared to leave the ship, he couldn't help but feel a pang of fear in his gut. The unknown was a powerful force. The Cybernetians could be anywhere, waiting for them to make a mistake. But he had no choice. He had come too far to turn back now. The team moved quickly, covering as much ground as they could. The planet's surface was quiet, the only sound coming from the soft crunch of their boots against the dry ground. Ethan's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of life, any movement. But the planet seemed lifeless, as if it had been abandoned long ago. After hours of searching, Ethan's group finally came across a small building hidden among the ruins. It was old and rundown, but it looked like it might have been used recently. The distress signals had originated from this area. Ethan's heart raced as he motioned for his team to move in. This was it. They were close. Inside the building, it was dark and cold. The air smelled of dust and decay. As they moved further into the building, they finally saw her. Zaria was sitting in a corner, her back against the wall. She looked weak, her body frail from the lack of proper care. Her once pristine cybernetic enhancements were damaged, wires and metal parts exposed where they had been broken. But even in her weakened state, she was still beautiful, still powerful. Zaria looked up as Ethan and his team approached. Her eyes were filled with suspicion and fear. She had been abandoned by her own people. Why would anyone come to help her now? "What do you want?" she asked, her voice hoarse but strong. "Why are you here?" As the human fleet began its journey toward the desolate planet, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what he would find when they arrived. Would Zaria be alive? Would she be willing to accept their help, or would she reject them as she had rejected everyone else? He didn't know, but he was going to find out. The stars above seemed endless, like an ocean of lights scattered across the universe. The human fleet moved swiftly through the void, each ship carrying its own story, its own purpose. But for Ethan, the mission he was on had become something more than just a military operation. It was a test of everything he believed in, a test of humanity's ability to stand for what was right, even when the cost was high. As the fleet made its way toward the desolate planet where Princess Zaria was stranded, Ethan's thoughts were filled with uncertainty. The plan was risky, and they were still vastly outnumbered. The Cybernetians had a powerful military, and they wouldn't just let a small human fleet invade their space without retaliating. But Ethan couldn't let fear stop him now. He had made his decision, and there was no turning back. He had gathered a handful of the most experienced officers from his ship. They had pledged their support, agreeing that the princess's rescue was worth the risk. The fleet's commander, Captain Briggs, was one of the few who had stood by him. The rest of the crew, though uncertain, trusted Ethan. He had earned their respect over the years, and now they were willing to follow him into the unknown. "Ethan," Captain Briggs said as he walked into the ship's command center, "we're almost there. The fleet is ready, but we need to talk strategy. Once we reach the planet, the Cybernetians will know we're here. We'll be fighting for our lives." Ethan nodded. "I know, but we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for her. For Zaria." Briggs sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I still don't fully understand why this is worth the risk. But I trust you. Let's make sure we have a plan for when we get there." The fleet's approach to the planet was quiet, almost eerie. The once thriving world was now a barren wasteland, filled with crumbling ruins and shattered machines. The planet's atmosphere was thick with dust, and the air felt heavy, as though it had been waiting for something, for someone, to return. Ethan's ship was the first to break through the planet's atmosphere, the other ships following closely behind. They landed in a secure area far from the main Cybernation strongholds, hoping to avoid detection for as long as possible. The crew immediately went to work, setting up a perimeter and preparing for any potential attacks. Ethan felt a sense of urgency in his chest as he looked at the empty landscape outside the ship's window. He didn't know what awaited them on the surface. Would Zaria be alive? Would she be willing to trust them? He couldn't afford to wait any longer. The time to act was now. He grabbed his communication device and sent a message to Captain Briggs. "We're ready. Let's move out. We'll find her." The plan was simple. The team would divide into smaller groups to search the area for any signs of life. Ethan and a few of his most trusted soldiers would head to the coordinates where the distress signals had originated. They would find Zaria and bring her back to safety. As Ethan prepared to leave the ship, he couldn't help but feel a pang of fear in his gut. The unknown was a powerful force. The Cybernetians could be anywhere, waiting for them to make a mistake. But he had no choice. He had come too far to turn back now. The team moved quickly, covering as much ground as they could. The planet's surface was quiet, the only sound coming from the soft crunch of their boots against the dry ground. Ethan's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of life, any movement. But the planet seemed lifeless, as if it had been abandoned long ago. After hours of searching, Ethan's group finally came across a small building hidden among the ruins. It was old and rundown, but it looked like it might have been used recently. The distress signals had originated from this area. Ethan's heart raced as he motioned for his team to move in. This was it. They were close. Inside the building, it was dark and cold. The air smelled of dust and decay. As they moved further into the building, they finally saw her. Zaria was sitting in a corner, her back against the wall. She looked weak, her body frail from the lack of proper care. Her once pristine cybernetic enhancements were damaged, wires and metal parts exposed where they had been broken. But even in her weakened state, she was still beautiful, still powerful. Zaria looked up as Ethan and his team approached. Her eyes were filled with suspicion and fear. She had been abandoned by her own people. Why would anyone come to help her now? "What do you want?" she asked, her voice hoarse but strong. "Why are you here?" Ethan stepped forward, keeping his hands visible. "We came to rescue you. My name is Ethan. We're here to take you back. You don't have to be alone anymore." Zaria's eyes narrowed. "You think you can save me? I don't need saving." Ethan shook his head. "I'm not here to force you. But I believe you deserve more than this. You've been abandoned, but we're not going to leave you behind." Zaria studied him for a moment, and for the first time since Ethan had arrived, she seemed to soften. There was a flicker of hope in her eyes, quickly masked by doubt. "I don't trust you," she said quietly. "Why should I?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He understood her hesitation. He couldn't blame her, but he wasn't going to leave her here. "Because I'm not like them," he said simply. "You don't have to trust me, but I'm not leaving you to die. Not like they did." For a long moment, Zaria said nothing. Then, slowly, she stood up. Her cybernetic body creaked and groaned, but she managed to stand tall, despite the damage. Her eyes met Ethan's, and for the first time, he saw a spark of something. Trust, maybe, or at least the beginning of it. "I'll go with you," she said quietly. "But if you betray me, I'll make sure you regret it." Ethan nodded. "I won't betray you. I promise." And so the first step of the mission was complete. Ethan had found Zaria. Now they would have to survive the wrath of the Cybernetians. The real fight was just beginning. The human fleet had barely begun to settle into its new position when the first signs of danger appeared. The once calm sky of the barren planet began to change, dark clouds swirling above, as if answering the tension that filled the air. It was only a matter of time before the Cybernetians responded, and Ethan knew that the calm before the storm was about to end. As Zaria and the human soldiers made their way back to the landing site, Ethan's thoughts were already on the next phase of their mission. They had found the princess, but now they needed to leave the planet safely. The fleet was ready to evacuate, but Ethan knew the Cybernetians would not let them go easily. They would do whatever it took to stop him from taking Zaria. Ethan gathered his officers for a quick briefing. The mood was tense as they all knew what was coming. The Cybernetians were a powerful force, and they would not simply let a small human fleet invade their territory without retaliation. The planet, once a quiet graveyard of machines, now seemed to hold an air of danger. It was as if the planet itself was waiting for the inevitable clash. "Ethan," Captain Briggs began, his voice low but steady. "We've been monitoring the enemy's movements. They're already mobilizing. They know we're here." Ethan nodded, his mind racing through their options. "We need to move fast. Once they realize we're trying to leave, they'll stop at nothing to stop us. I need you all to be ready. We're not just running. We're fighting our way out." As the fleet made its preparations, the distant rumble of approaching ships was heard. The ground began to shake, and Ethan felt a sense of urgency rise within him. The Cybernetians were here. The fleet, with its sleek, advanced ships came into view, cutting through the clouds like predators on the hunt. Zarya, standing beside Ethan, felt the tension in the air. She had not seen her people in years, not since they had betrayed her. Now, they were coming for her. The thought stirred something deep within her, a sense of loss, perhaps, or the remnants of a past life she could never reclaim. "They're coming," she said quietly, her eyes scanning the sky. "You'll have to move fast. They won't stop until they catch you." Ethan turned to her, his expression serious. "We're not going anywhere unless you're safe. We made a promise." Zarya looked at him, her face unreadable. For a moment, she said nothing, her gaze distant. Finally, she spoke again, her voice carrying a quiet strength. "You're brave, human. I can't promise you a future, but I'll fight with you. You're the first to ever come for me." Ethan nodded. "We don't leave anyone behind." As the human fleet prepared to launch, a message came through from the Cybernetians. It was a threat, simple and to the point. "Leave the planet immediately. If you do not, you will be destroyed." The message was clear. The Cybernetians would show no mercy. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Prepare for battle. We're not leaving without her." The first wave of Cybernetian ships came into view, their dark, metallic bodies cutting through the atmosphere. They were imposing, their weapons gleaming, and they moved with precision. Ethan's crew was ready. The human fleet, though smaller, was armed with the best technology available. They had no choice but to stand their ground. "Hold tight," Ethan said to his officers as he turned to the command center. "We're in for a fight." The battle began quickly, the human ships firing their weapons at the incoming enemy. The air was filled with the sound of lasers and explosions as the two fleets clashed. The human fleet was outmatched, but they fought with determination, each ship moving with the precision of a well-practiced team. Zarya stood at the observation deck, watching the battle unfold. She had been trained in combat, but seeing her people, her former allies, fighting against humanity stirred something inside her. The anger and betrayal she had felt for years seemed to boil over. But more than that, she realized she was fighting not just for herself, but for a chance to change the future of her people. Her cybernetic enhancements, damaged as they were, flared to life once again. Her body hummed with energy, her strength returning as her implants adjusted. She was not fully healed, but the energy inside her surged as if responding to her own will. She turned to Ethan, her voice firm. "I'm not going to sit here and watch. I'll help. You can't win this without me." Ethan hesitated for a moment, looking at her. "You're not in full condition. I can't let you." "I'm not asking for permission," she interrupted, her eyes glowing with a fierce light. "I've been a prisoner in my own body long enough. Let me fight." And fight she did. With a strength that surprised even Ethan, Zarya moved to the ship's weapon systems. She interfaced with the ship's controls using her cybernetic enhancements, her mind linking with the systems. The weapons powered up, firing with deadly precision at the advancing Cybernetians. Her strikes were calculated, each one hitting its target with perfect accuracy. Ethan watched as Zarya took control, her every move a testament to the power she had once wielded as a leader of her people. The Cybernetians, though formidable, were caught off guard by the sudden onslaught. They had underestimated the human forces, but they had also underestimated Zarya. As the battle raged on, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of hope rising within him. They were winning, against all odds. The human fleet, bolstered by Zarya's strength, was holding its own. But they couldn't keep this up forever. They needed to get to safety. "We're almost through," Captain Briggs said, his voice crackling over the comm. "But we need to break through their main defense grid. The sooner we do that, the sooner we can get to the extraction point." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding. "All ships, focus fire on their defense grid. We break through now, or we never get out." The final push began. With Zarya's help, the human fleet broke through the Cybernetians' defenses, The remaining enemy ships were scattered, retreating into the atmosphere, unable to hold them. "We've won," Ethan said, his voice filled with a sense of disbelief. "We actually did it." But Zeria wasn't smiling. Her eyes were still filled with determination, and the battle was far from over. The Cybernetians would return, and this fight would not be won easily. But for now, they had survived. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. The human fleet had managed to break through the Cybernetians' defenses, and Zeria, the abandoned princess, had proved herself to be more than just a powerful ally. She was the key to humanity's victory. But even with the battle behind them, Ethan knew that their struggles had only just begun. Zeria stood on the bridge of the command ship, her expression unreadable as she stared out into the vastness of space. The battle had drained her, physically and emotionally, but she had proven to herself that she still had the strength to fight. In the silence of the command room, Ethan approached her, the weight of their shared victory heavy on his shoulders. "You fought well," he said, his voice filled with admiration. Zeria didn't turn to look at him, but her voice was steady. "I wasn't fighting for you. I was fighting for myself. For my people. I have nothing left to lose, Ethan. The Cybernetians abandoned me, and now I will make them pay for it." Ethan understood the bitterness in her words. He knew what it felt like to fight for something lost, something beyond reach. But he also knew that revenge alone wouldn't bring her peace. He stepped closer to her, trying to bridge the gap between them. "I didn't expect you to join us," Ethan said quietly. "You could have stayed hidden, left us to do the fighting, but you didn't." Zeria finally turned to face him. Her cybernetic eyes glowed faintly, their usual coldness softened by the faintest trace of something else, something like gratitude. "I've been alone for so long, Ethan. I was alone when my people turned their backs on me. You're the first to come for me, the first to offer me a chance at freedom. I may not trust you completely, but I can't ignore what you've done for me." Ethan felt a small flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "We're not just fighting for you, Zeria. We're fighting for all of us. Humans, Cybernetians, everyone. We can't keep living in a world where we fight each other endlessly." Zeria's expression hardened again. "You think they'll listen? The Cybernetians are too proud. They'll never accept anyone who isn't one of their own. They'll never accept me again, no matter how much I want them to." "I don't think they'll have a choice," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "I think you have the power to change that. You have the chance to reshape your people's future, if you're willing to fight for it." Zeria stared at him, the weight of his words settling in her mind. She had been betrayed by her people, left to die on a forgotten planet. The wounds ran deep, and the bitterness was something she had carried with her for so long. But something in Ethan's eyes, the way he looked at her, made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for redemption, not just for her, but for her entire species. "I don't know if I can trust them again," she said softly, "but I'm willing to try. For them. For you." Ethan gave her a small, understanding nod. He could see the battle raging inside her, the conflict between her desire for revenge and the possibility of something more. The decision wouldn't be easy, but it was hers to make. "We'll figure it out together," Ethan said, "one step at a time." Zeria looked out at the stars once more, her thoughts drifting back to her people, to the life she had lost. But now, for the first time in years, she felt a spark of hope, a hope that maybe the future didn't have to be defined by betrayal and loss. Maybe it could be different. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with the weight of their shared purpose. Together, they would face the challenges ahead. And while the Cybernetians might not welcome them back with open arms, Ethan knew they would face whatever came next side by side. As the fleet began its journey toward the next phase of their mission, Ethan and Zeria worked in tandem, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. The human soldiers, once unsure of the princess's place among them, now saw her as one of their own. Zeria's presence had changed everything. She wasn't just the last of the Cybernetians' royal family. She was a symbol of resistance, a living testament to the strength of the human spirit. Zarya wasn't sure what her future held, but for the first time in years, she was ready to fight for it. She wasn't alone anymore, and she wasn't the broken princess she once was. She was a leader in her own right, ready to take back her world, or, at the very least, to make sure no one else suffered as she had. One night, as the stars outside the ship twinkled like tiny beacons of hope, Zarya and Ethan stood together on the observation deck. The quiet of space was almost peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded in the past days. But in the stillness, both of them knew that the real battle had only just begun. "We'll take it one step at a time," Ethan said, his voice calm. "But we'll get through it." Zarya looked at him, the faintest smile touching her lips. "I never thought I'd say this, but thank you, Ethan, for everything." "You don't have to thank me," Ethan replied, his eyes meeting hers. "We're in this together." As the ship continued its journey through the stars, both Zarya and Ethan knew that the future was uncertain. But they also knew that they weren't alone. Together, they would fight for a better future, no matter what it took. The days following their escape from the Cybernetians' forces were filled with uncertainty and tension. The human fleet, though victorious in the initial battle, knew the fight was far from over. They had rescued Princess Zarya, but now they had to prepare for the inevitable retaliation from the Cybernetians. Zarya's presence on the fleet was a game-changer, but it was also a symbol that the Cybernetians would not ignore. As the fleet moved through deep space, the officers gathered around a holographic table, their faces serious. Ethan stood at the head of the table, his posture strong but his mind clouded with the weight of what was to come. "We've bought ourselves some time," Ethan began, his voice calm but firm. "But we won't have much longer. The Cybernetians will come for us, and when they do, we need to be ready." Captain Briggs nodded. "We've seen their response time before. They'll be coming for us with everything they've got. Our fleet might be small compared to theirs, but we fought our way this far." Ethan turned to Zarya, who stood silently off to the side, her eyes distant. She had been quiet since the last battle, her mind likely still processing the events that had unfolded. The anger that had once driven her seemed to be replaced by a sense of focus and determination. She was no longer just a princess, she was a warrior. "I know my people," Zarya said, her voice cutting through the silence. "The Cybernetians are ruthless, but they don't know how far I've come. They'll think I'm weak, abandoned. They'll underestimate us." Ethan's eyes met hers, a quiet understanding passing between them. "That's exactly what we're counting on." Zarya's gaze hardened. "We can't just wait for them to come to us. We need to take the fight to them. If we stay on the defensive, we'll lose." The officers exchanged uncertain glances. Captain Briggs stepped forward, his voice skeptical. "Zarya, I get your point, but the Cybernetians have a fleet far larger than ours. We're already at a disadvantage. Attacking them directly could mean the end of this mission, the end of everything." "I'm not asking for a direct assault," Zarya responded, her voice unwavering. "But we need to strike at their weakest points. We can disrupt their supply lines, damage their ships, and take away their advantage. If we do it right, we can turn the tide of this war." Ethan was silent for a moment, weighing Zarya's words. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Every move they made would need to be carefully planned. But they couldn't afford to wait any longer. The Cybernetians were coming, and they needed to show them that humanity wasn't to be underestimated. "All right," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "We'll hit them where it hurts. But we do it smart. No reckless moves." The next few days were spent preparing for the mission ahead. The human fleet had limited resources, but their soldiers were determined. Zarya worked alongside the fleet's engineers, helping to make the necessary repairs to her damaged cybernetic systems and offering her knowledge of cybernetic technology. The more they learned, the better equipped they would be to fight back. Zarya had always known she would have to fight to reclaim her people's respect, But she hadn't expected to be leading a battle alongside humans. She had once seen them as weak and insignificant compared to her people's advanced technology. But now she saw them differently. The humans were resilient, resourceful, and determined. And it was that spirit that had brought them this far. When the plan was ready, the fleet moved out once more, this time to strike at a Cybernetic supply station located on the edge of their territory. The station was crucial for the Cybernetians' ability to wage war, and disrupting it would weaken their forces. But it was also heavily guarded, and the risk of failure was high. As the human fleet approached the station, tension filled the air. Zarya stood alongside Ethan on the bridge, her eyes focused on the approaching target. She felt a surge of energy as her cybernetic enhancements activated. The hum of power filled her senses, and she felt more alive than she had in years. She was no longer the abandoned princess. She was a leader in her own right. "Prepare for action," Ethan ordered. "We move in fast, hit their defenses, and then retreat. No need for a prolonged fight." The ships moved into position, and the attack began. The human fleet launched a barrage of weapons at the station, their lasers cutting through the defenses with deadly precision. Zarya worked with the crew, guiding them through the attack, her cybernetic systems syncing with the ship's targeting systems. Her knowledge of cybernetic technology allowed them to bypass several of the station's defense protocols, giving them an unexpected advantage. As the station's shields began to weaken, the human fleet pressed the attack. The Cybernetians responded quickly, launching their own counterattack. But the human fleet, though outmatched, fought with everything they had. Zarya's leadership and Ethan's strategy were proving to be a powerful combination. The battle raged on, but the tide was turning in their favor. Slowly but surely, the Cybernetians' defenses began to crumble. The supply station, once a symbol of their power, was now a burning wreck. "Direct hit," one of the officers shouted, their cores destabilizing. The explosion that followed was deafening. The station's core exploded, sending shockwaves through the area. The human fleet, having completed their mission, quickly began to retreat. The damage had been done. As they regrouped, Ethan looked out at the burning remnants of the station. "We did it. We've just made a major dent in their plans." Zarya stood beside him, her face a mixture of satisfaction and determination. "This is just the beginning. They'll come for us harder now, but we've shown them that we can fight back. We've turned the tide." Ethan nodded, knowing that the victory had only shifted the balance for a moment. The real battle was still ahead. But for now, they had proven that even against overwhelming odds, humanity, and Zarya, could stand tall. The stars shimmered in the distance, casting their light on the fleet as it prepared for what would be the most critical battle of all. The damage to the Cybernetic supply station had sent shockwaves through their military command, but the victory had only bought them time. The Cybernetians were preparing for a full-scale retaliation. They knew now that the humans were not just an annoyance. They were a threat. Zarya stood on the bridge, her cybernetic systems fully restored after weeks of careful repairs. She had taken the time to bond with the crew, and despite the tension, they had come to see her not as a princess, but as a leader. The thought comforted her, but it also weighed heavily on her shoulders. The responsibility of her people's future now lay with her, and with the humans who had come to her aid when no one else would. "This is it," Ethan said as he approached her, his voice steady but full of resolve. "We've got one shot to end this. The Cybernetians are coming for us, and we can't let them crush us now." Zarya nodded, her gaze fixed on the holographic map of the battlefield. The human fleet was outnumbered, but they had a secret weapon. The knowledge that Zarya brought with her, a tactical advantage the Cybernetians didn't anticipate. "I'll be with you," she said, her voice low. "I'm not letting them win this time." Ethan smiled faintly. "I never doubted that for a second." The fleet moved into position, ready for the fight that would determine the fate of not only the humans, but also Zarya's people. The Cybernetians' massive armada loomed on the horizon. Their sleek, dark ships cutting through space like shadows. Their weapons were powerful, and their numbers overwhelming. Yet, for the first time, the human fleet felt more like an army of rebels than a small force trying to survive. "We need to hit them hard and fast," Ethan said, his voice commanding. "No hesitation. We take out their central command, then fall back. We won't be able to hold them off for long, but if we can cripple their leadership, the rest of their forces will fall into disarray." Zeria nodded, her cybernetic eyes scanning the battlefield. "Leave the central command to me. I know their systems better than anyone. I'll guide the ships through the weak points." With the plan set, the battle began. The human fleet charged forward, launching a barrage of weapons at the incoming Cybernetic ships. The sound of explosions filled the air, and the flash of laser fire illuminated the dark expanse of space. The two fleets collided with all the force of a thunderstorm, each side fighting for their own survival. Zeria's presence was felt immediately. Her cybernetic systems interfaced with the fleet's weapons, guiding them with precision and speed. The human ships struck with deadly accuracy, targeting the Cybernetians' weak spots. Each shot was calculated, each move part of a larger strategy. It was a dance of destruction, and Zeria was the conductor. As the battle raged on, Ethan led the charge alongside his officers, his thoughts always on the mission. Every ship that fell, every explosion, was a step closer to victory, but also a reminder of the high cost. But there was no turning back. They couldn't afford to lose. "We're almost there," Captain Briggs called out over the comms, his voice tense. "Just a little more. Keep pushing." Zeria worked relentlessly, her mind connected to the human ships, directing their movements with the speed and skill of someone who had once been the ruler of a powerful people. She knew the Cybernetians better than anyone. Their weaknesses were laid bare before her. They had underestimated humanity. They had underestimated her. "We're in position," Zeria said, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. "Target the central command. I'll take care of the rest." Ethan gave her a quick nod. "We're counting on you." The final push began. Zeria's guidance allowed the human fleet to breach the central command of the Cybernetian ships. The battle raged on around them. But now, the tide was turning. The central command, once a symbol of cybernetic power, began to falter. Their communication systems were hacked, their command structure crippled. The Cybernetians, once an unstoppable force, now found themselves in disarray. Their remaining ships began to retreat, confused and unable to coordinate a proper counterattack. The human fleet pressed on, taking advantage of the opening that Zeria had created. With the command structure destroyed, the remaining Cybernetic forces fell apart. The fleet's once imposing presence was now fractured, their ships retreating into the darkness of space. Victory was within reach. Zeria watched the retreating ships, her heart pounding in her chest. She had led them to victory, but it had come at a great cost. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. The Cybernetians would regroup, and they would return. But for now, the human fleet had made their mark. "We did it," Ethan said, his voice full of disbelief and relief. Zeria nodded, though her expression remained unreadable. "For now. But this fight isn't over. The Cybernetians will return, and we need to be ready." Ethan turned to her, the weight of everything they had accomplished sinking in. "We will be. Together, we'll make sure that this time, we don't lose." As the fleet began to regroup and the final remnants of the Cybernetic forces disappeared into the distance, Zeria looked out at the stars. Her people's future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Ethan joined her at the observation deck, the two of them standing side by side as they watched the stars in silence. The galaxy was vast, and the challenges ahead were many, but they had proven something important. They had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity could rise to the occasion. And with Zeria leading her people, perhaps the Cybernetians' empire would one day fall. But for now, they had won.